Hey guys, this is Echo Soundworks, and you're checking out a video in support of our sound set and sample pack, Havana. So Havana, best way to sum it up, is a sound set that kind of is inspired by the really vibrant sounds of Latin, tropical, and Caribbean music. It's meant for multiple genres. Obviously, a big part of it is reggaeton, moombahton, and like Afro pop, right? Anything that has a Latin, tropical, Caribbean flair to it. So I wanted to make a couple videos in support of it, showing you, how to get the sounds in some of the demos, how to make some of the tracks, right? Now in this video, we'll be looking at how you can create Latin-inspired, moombahton-inspired, reggaeton-inspired top loops and percussive loops. So we will of course be using sounds and samples from Havana, but even if you have no interest in this pack, it doesn't matter. I think you'll still get some great information from this video, and you could apply the same techniques to samples you already have. So let's dive into Logic and get started. All right, so before we get into the actual percussive, the top loop section of this video, let's quickly talk about kick and snare, because that's kind of a pitfall I think you can run into with this moombahton, reggaeton, Afropop type of genre. So the kick that I just used one of the kicks here in the Latin folder. So if we go to the bonus, the drums, the one shots, it is in the one that's called Latin and Moomba kicks. So these are kicks that heavily lean on Latin-inspired music. So when I was researching stuff for Havana, I came across a lot of like Colombian-produced tracks. There's an artist named Maluma who I actually ended up really liking. Shakira still makes music. Who knew? But a lot of these songs are using kicks that to me initially sounded almost like outdated like moombahton kicks, but they work so well for this genre. It's crazy that you hear them in isolation. You might initially be like, I don't know about that. But when you try them in the actual context of a mix or a track, they just work. So we have two folders in Havana because we have folders and kicks for hip hop and just track. Right? Like this kick would be way too hard for this track. It would just be too much, too in your face. So we have both flavors, right? The Latin Moomba kicks. Some of them have a little bit more tail. So I just ended up using one of those that was close to the key of my track. So I used this one and I pitched everything down one semitone because this kick is tuned to D, as the name suggests, and the track's in C sharp. So let's move on to the snare. Now, a lot of Latin, moombahton, reggaeton, they go do, ga, do, and it accentuates the upbeat vibe of the music. You'll notice that if we look at our chords and just solo the chords real quick, right? That first downbeat and the second downbeat is kind of open. It's all on upbeats. It's accented, right? It's like that with the bass line as well. The bass line has this kind of groove to it. So if you do something with your drums that accentuates the downbeats more than just what's there with the kick, it can kind of ruin that vibe. So I have two snare tracks here, and I'm going to turn these up. Right? It just doesn't sound right. So let's turn those back down. Now that works. So basically it's just really quiet and they're really short snares. So inside of Havana, we have a bunch of different snare sounds. We have fusion snares, just like the kicks, things that I'd work with like trap, future bass, different genres, EDM. And then we have the Latin snares folder. So I took two snares, shortened them a little bit by option dragging, and then layered them together. I had to tune the second one up 3 semitones to get to fit. But there they are in isolation. And that kind of gives every other kick hit a slightly different flavor. Not as monotonous, I guess, but it doesn't accentuate the downbeat because I have it mixed so low. All right, so what you can typically do to get this kind of do-ga vibe is use short snares or rim shots, right? And you might have to shorten them depending on how you have certain sections of your like chords and bass set up. But for instance, I could take one of these snares that we've already used. This one would be a great one. Let's copy and paste it down. I'm holding down Alt or Option on my keyboard. Let's turn this guy up. So I have my grid set to a 16th note grid value. And what that means is just how these little tick marks are divided. So if you're following along in a different DAW or you don't really use Logic, you should still be able to follow. So in a 16th note division, I'm going to go one tick mark back from my second kick hit with the snares layered. And that will be the ducat, right? So if we listen to this. So then we just need to get one more, and that is 2 ticks past that second kick. So now we'll have do-ga-do-ga. Right, so that is a huge part of all things Latin, Moombahton, reggaeton, Afropop type drum beats. So you can use snares for this. Obviously, this would work. Right, you could use toms. So you typically don't want one with too much tone to it, like pitched tone. So I'm going to take this, going to shorten it, add a little fade at the end, and then what I'll typically do is hold down Alt or Option on my keyboard, and I'll actually shorten the duration of the sample. So let's copy and paste these out. When you shorten the tom samples, they get kind of this like they start to take on a little bit more of a snare tone, but with a snare that has a tonal quality to it. You can also use various bits of percussion. So I'm going to go into the percussion folder in the Havana one-shots. Let's go to the short percussion folder. These are just a bunch of short, random percussion sounds that you can use for your top loops and this very purpose. So I'm going to take a couple of these in. We might have to change the pitch, but other than that, they should be pretty much good to go. So let's get these, we'll layer it with that first snare that we're messing around with. So you can use a lot of different types of sounds for this vibe and this character, but I want to use something that's more conducive to this track. So I'm not going to use a tom. I think I want to mess around with some snare, maybe some type of weird percussion sound. I'm going to go to the hybrid percussion folder because there's some weird process stuff going on there. I like bottle pop. So let's take bottle pop and we'll put that right here on our timeline. And let's find one more. Let's do this conga. All right, so let's try getting these in with that other snare that we had. I'm going to shorten this and fade out a little bit at the last. All right, let's get the conga, see if that works. It's kind of cool. So again, gonna just kind of make these a little bit shorter. So let's delete this one and let's get this over to its proper spot. Let's try this, see how it sounds with the drums. So this is kind of like your bass line. It's the most basic thing you can do in this type of genre. So let's try to spice it up. So one thing that I kind of noticed from certain tracks that were clearly produced by like Latin producers, they would start to shift some of these off hits just a little bit, like away from that do-ga-do-ga. They'd have a little bit extra space. And this really starts to sound cool with hi-hats. So let's do this right now. It's going to sound a little bit weird, but when we get hi-hats in there and there's more hits happening, it'll make perfect sense. But check this out. So I loaded up an instance of Battery 4 and I threw in some samples from Havana. So we have a snare sound that I pitched up an octave. Just 3 little snare sounds. Or snare-esque sounds, right? It's the first tier of percussion. So what I love about Battery is this articulation slot on the setup. It can do some weird, cool like rolls, alternate strokes. So check it out. There's a flam. Right, so a lot of cool stuff you can do. There's the drag. One thing that's it's kind of unpredictable. It's called a Geiger counter. I'm going to set to 50% here, and I'm just going to hit record, and you can see what happens. So I just bounced that to audio, and then we can quantize and kind of chop up, but I'm just gonna listen for some ideas. So this first one actually works. I would just take out this very first hit. So we got kind of this going on. So really quickly, I chopped them up and moved them around. Took maybe a couple minutes here. So off camera, I pulled in a bunch of samples from Havana into Battery 4. If you guys aren't Battery 4 users, doesn't matter. You can apply these same techniques to your sampler of choice. So if you use Ableton, drum rack. If you use any other, you have Contact, EXS24. If you're a poor misguided soul, I guess you could use EXS24, but you get the idea. Any sampler, the things you want to be able to quickly have access to are tune and velocity sensitivity. So when you're trying to get like hand percussion, I pulled in a bunch of bongos and congas. Right, if it's all the same, same velocity, which would be what happened if I just drag and drop the samples into my arrange window, my actual timeline of my DAW, it's going to sound really robotic, really mechanic, which 9 times out of 10 isn't going to sound right for that type of percussion. So what I did was I loaded these in, and then in Battery 4, I just went to the velocity curve and I turned it down. So now I can do. We're going to start to mess around with this and record some in. So I paused the record so you guys didn't have to see this whole process because this is better to kind of explain in bits and pieces. Otherwise, this video would be really long. So it took about probably, 8 to 10 minutes around there. So what I did was I just opened it up. I quantized it. The last half of it was just garbage. The first half, I had some good ideas. So if you're messing around with playing MIDI and doing this, using this technique, which I think is a really great technique to get percussive elements into your tracks, is not everything you play has to be right. Like, I grabbed certain ideas and I kind of flew them over and I deleted the things that were just wrong, just not right for the vibe, or they just didn't make sense musically, right? So what we have right now is this. So there is still some velocity issues that I want to address. Now I took out this whole section right here because of that snare fill from earlier. Right now, alternatively, we could actually mirror that snare fill, which might actually make more sense. So I'll pop that in right now. So I put it right there. But I had like a whole little like groove there. It just didn't make sense. Now, there might be too many hits, so we can always mess around with deleting them. I always like having more to work with than less, right? So this one where those snare off hits happen, let's delete that. So I bounced the MIDI, the bongos, the hand percussion to audio, trying to not have commitment issues in all areas of my life. So what we're going to do now is we're going to process this with the LFO tool. I know you might be going like, what? Well, bear with me. So this is 4 on the floor, so kick, right? Anytime a kick hits with the bongos, which it doesn't appear to be many, but this might be useful because you could always sidechain it to your kick. It gets it out of the way. But more importantly to me in this example, I guess there's this first hit right there, but it's going to glue it together. Check this out. So I'm going to load up one of the sidechain presets in the LFO tool, and I'm not being choosy, I'm just kind of picking one. Right, sounds pretty cool. It glues together really well. So let's fly this over. We have our drum groove minus shakers and hi-hats. So I'm going to delete that last little bit right here on this bar because we have this battery fill from the snares down here. I'll move that up so we can see it. So this is our groove. So let's finish up by adding some shakers, maybe a tambourine. We'll see what fits. Now, a good general practice to get into when you are trying to program realistic sounding shakers, tambourines, those types of percussive instruments is to use samples or find samples that gives you a couple different options for different sections of the shake. So what I mean by that is when we sampled like this shaker here, same instrument. These are all the same 3 things, right? Then we got a couple of the cabasas. It makes it so when you're actually programming it, it sounds realistic. I have a shaker in my hand right now. The mic I talk into is not the type of microphone you would want to record a shaker with, but you'll get the idea. When you're shaking something like an actual shaker, this is a LP plastic shaker, it's very hard to get the exact same sound on 2 consecutive hits because there's a backwards and a forwards motion. And then even with that, there's going to be some variance with each backwards and forwards motion because it's beads inside of an actual, physical space inside of plastic, metal, wood, whatever it may be. So that's why this is going to sound way better bouncing back and forth between these 3 like cabasa sounds, right? Or these. as opposed to going. All right, so let's record some in real quick. So the first thing I'm gonna do is quantize, and then kind of, there's a couple sections that I actually liked, and there are a couple that were pretty bad. So this middle section here got a little weird, but the first couple bars I really like because I was playing something consistently. So that and listen. All right, that might be cool to kind of have this turnaround. So I just gotta work on this bar right here. So I don't want the really, really loud volumes here on these. It just kind of jumps out of nowhere. All right, so that might be cool. So now we have two separate patterns. All right, so actually what I kind of hear and see happening is we're gonna take this. I'm just gonna mute these for now. Let's take this. This will be my actual first pattern here. I'll take this, because it's a little bit more relaxed, I guess. So take that, copy and paste it. All right, so I'm gonna keep that basically for the first 4 bars. And then let's copy and paste over that first section that I did have into the final few bars, because it will be more, kind of more at a frenetic pace, and it'll help ramp up the energy. So we can copy these back over and unmute them. Let's listen from bar 24 on. All right, so the rest of the hi-hats, or shakers rather, are flown over at the ending. Let's get one more thing in, and we'll call it a day. Let's start to get some just basic hits on the actual downbeats, because we haven't done much of anything with the downbeats in a minute. So let's listen to this. This is our shaker groove now. So that sums up this look at creating Latin, Moombahton, Afropop, reggaeton type beats with Havana. If you guys have any questions or comments, let me know below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm Echo Soundworks. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I will see you next time.